Welcome everyone to episode 4 of the Average Ontario Anglers podcast. And we have a super timely episode today. It is about creek fishing for steelhead. I'm this week's host, Jesse, and we all know Andrew, the man with the mustache. How's it going?
I'm doing all right.
Excellent. If you're a first-time listener tuning in, the Average Ontario Anglers podcast is 3 things. Number 1, it's relatable. Number 2, it's entertaining. And number 3, it's very real. We're just normal guys, no fancy bass boats or anything. We're just like you. If you're listening and you do have a bass boat, though, please give us a call. But we cover topics that every angler thinks and talks about, and we're happy to share our experiences, what we've learned, and our knowledge and opinions. And we have lots of opinions, right, Andrew?
100%. Well, mainly this guy over here, but yeah.
So just to start off, this week's podcast giveaway sponsor has been donated by Marissa at the Row Bro. Now, every week, the way it works is we have paired up with a bunch of local companies, and we're happy to have paired up with Marissa at the Row Bro. The Row Bro is a very cool paracord row container with a carabiner that clips onto your vest. So if you're an avid steelhead or salmon fisherman, it's a must-have. And I have to say that I've been steelhead fishing for a long time. As soon as these started becoming more popular and I got one, I'm very happy, and I've lost very few containers of row, and it's always very handy. So we're going to get to the winner of that giveaway later. But today, instead of interesting fishing fact, unfortunately, Andrew had one ready, but I canceled on him.
Yeah.
Because we have something else.
It's also very interesting, and it also revolves around fishing. So it's still an interesting fishing fact in kind of a way.
It's very interesting. So this weekend is CanCast.
I can't wait.
It seems like I've waited so long for this week to come.
I've heard there's so much hype about this. For those that have heard about it, you've probably heard about it like dozens of times. For those of you who don't know about it, like listen up. This is awesome.
Yeah. So if you've never heard of CanCast, what's CanCast, Andrew?
So it is a fishing event show. So you're gonna have vendors from the big names, the big manufacturers like Shimano, like Daiwa. There they have their booths there. They have some tackle stores also have booths there, and you also have the tackle swap, which some people may remember from the Bowmanville tackle swap they used to have in the high school. So you're getting vintage gear, you're getting used gear, you're getting small bait manufacturers. It covers all bases.
I'm so stoked.
Yeah.
And okay, I know how you said it's a fishing show. I would like to say it is the fishing show.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We go to a lot of shows every year, but CanCast is legit the best one. So that's just my opinion.
Last year, this is only its second year, and it's already the biggest straight fishing show in Canada or something like that, right?
I'm pretty sure probably it is. I know on the website it says that it's the biggest fishing show in Southern Ontario or something, but it's probably the biggest fishing show in Canada.
So like last year when they had the first one, there were some hiccups with not with their planning or anything like that. It's just there were
COVID.
So many people interested.
It was COVID too. The restrictions.
It was COVID restrictions. So there's so many people interested. It was a hard time getting in the door. I mean, that's been addressed a few times, I know, by Kyle Carruthers. But this, I don't like. We were both there last year, and I would have to say that despite it being much smaller last year than it will be this weekend, it was the best fishing show I've ever been to.
100%.
Like I remember growing up going to the spring fishing show or the sportsman show,
and those are great. Nothing against them.
Yeah,
but
nothing
CanCast,
compared to CanCast.
It's different. And I have a little story to tell you. I was at Sale the other day, and I was talking to this guy, and we were looking at lures, and we started a conversation, and he said something about going to one of the fishing shows. I'm not going to name which one, but he's like, "Oh, did you go?" And I was like, "Yeah, I went." And he's like, "Oh, wasn't it awesome?" And I was like, "It was okay." He's like, "What do you mean? I thought it was awesome." And I was like, "Well, like half the booths had nothing to do with fishing, so that to me is kind of meh. Like I don't go to a fishing show to look at like a booth with granola bars in it. I don't care. Okay, I know like it has to happen, but like." And I said to him, "Have you ever been to CanCast?" And he's like, "No, I couldn't make it last year." And I was like, "Okay, that will change your mind on what you think the best fishing show is. That has nothing to do with the other shows, but like that's how good it is. Like people like that, I'm telling them, go to this show. You will not regret it. I know it may be a far drive. It's worth it. 100%.
For most of us, like we're in the Oshawa area. We people live in Bowmanville. A lot of the people around the Kawarthas, it's actually easier and more manageable and cheaper to get to Peterborough than it is downtown Toronto for the sportsman show.
100%.
Like it's a better location, I think, to the actual fishing community that it's for.
And I'll tell you, people are driving for miles to get. Like people, like if you think it's far to drive an hour to Peterborough, there are guys that are driving way farther than that, and that's for a reason.
Yeah,
because it's a really good show. And we have a venue list. We're not going to read all of them, but Andrew's going to mention some of the ones that we're excited to check out when we go to CanCast, and maybe you guys are too.
For sure. So
it's a big list though. Like
it's huge. There's
huge.
A bunch of stuff. So there's a list of vendors. Just read a few. Beaver lures. I know we're looking forward to that because they're hard to find for musky baits. Blackfly lures will be there. Canadian baits. We also have Daiwa, obviously. Dangle baits is great. I have
Dangle baits. Yeah,
really
Carson
cool.
is a really nice guy.
Yeah. And he makes some cool. I'm getting some more micro crankbaits from him. They worked really well in the BFS. But
he's like a master. Lure painter.
Yeah.
I bought a little topwater off him last year, and I did well with it.
For sure. We got East Hill Outdoors. That's fun. Euro Tackle. I'm excited about.
Euro Tackle.
Every time I see it, I can't buy it.
Yeah,
whenever it's at an event,
it's for display only.
Yeah.
It's like, well, we want to buy.
So apparently, I've heard rumors that you can actually purchase stuff from Euro Tackle this year. So
that's good.
I'm excited
because they have a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, Freedom Tackle will be cool. Handlebars, awesome.
Musky
spinners. Yep. Hashimoto Concepts. I can't wait to go to his booth. I'm messaging him online, and he's going to set aside one of the blades baits for me, which I've been
you're not
looking at for years.
With this guy, he is.
Follow him on Instagram and look at his baits.
He's like a master lure maker.
Yeah.
And it's not just stuff that you've seen. It's all very unique and very interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So we're excited to meet him finally.
Yeah. Kite Flies
also
will be there.
Hashimoto Concepts also has a podcast, so check it out.
Yeah. We also have Mac Attack Outdoors. There will be Musky Maniacs. It's going to be there.
Musky Maniacs, some of the best hats.
Raw
like Andrew's
fish.
wearing one right now, but hey. Yeah, I have a raw fish hat on right now.
So they're going to be there as well. Like I said, you got Peterborough Pro Tackle's going to be there.
And apparently they rented like 14 booths. It's going to be a big chunk of good deals in there.
Another one I'm super excited for is the Scumfrog booth.
Cool.
I'm a big Scumfrog fan.
We
so
are
I'd like
big
to see
Scumfrog.
if they have some of their
and they have new products coming out, and they're probably going to be there. I can't say for sure, but I'm hoping that the new products. They have a Launch Frog junior size now.
Yeah.
Woo!
Well, because this is the first one after iCast. This is the first event after iCast where everything gets released that now you can actually purchase these things that are released.
So if you're not familiar with iCast, iCast is like the big show in Florida every year where they release all the new stuff, new reels, new baits, everything. And if CanCast was before iCast, you wouldn't see any of that stuff. But CanCast strategically is after. So all the new stuff is going to get brought to this event. So if you want to see new stuff literally right after iCast, come to CanCast.
It's going to be the first event you can actually see this stuff at in Canada. A couple of other things. YOLO Tech, Yamamoto Baits is cool.
Baits,
and of course our sponsor for the giveaway, the Robro, will also be there.
The Robro will be there. And I have an extra secret giveaway that we're going to talk to you about after. So for this week's giveaway, we're giving away a custom Robro, and Marissa's gonna, whoever wins, she's gonna custom build this whatever color you want, which is really cool. But she's also giving away a Robro at CanCast for our giveaway as well. So that is the second part of the giveaway. But you have to go to CanCast to pick it up. So we're gonna be announcing that giveaway winner very soon, before CanCast, a few days before. So. Very exciting.
Awesome. No, I can't wait for that. It's one of the cool things too. So again, those are some of the vendors. There's also 80 personal tables. So these are guys like the tackle swap section. These are guys who they've been collecting old baits for years, or it's just their old tackle boxes. You'll have some pros there sometimes.
Or they're pros and they have all this
extra
stuff.
And they have last year's gear and they're selling that off. So you can get some really good deals on, some used equipment that still has a lot of life in it. Or one of my favorite things to do is look for those vintage baits, and you can get a good deal on some of the vintage baits that are hard to find otherwise. And there's the selection there is crazy.
Really good deals. Like last year, I brought a decent amount of cash, but I was like, I should have brought way more. Like if you want to save money, if you have no qualms about buying used gear in good condition, and you want to save money, 100% go to those 80 tables. You will save a ton of money. You can buy we were looking at musky lures and bait casting reels, all in good shape, or some of them, a little beat up, but dirt cheap.
To play devil's advocate here, though, if you want to save money, don't go to this show if you're a fisherman, because you'll be spending money. 100%. Be prepared.
But
it's worth it, though.
It's not the regular, when you go to like the normal fishing shows, like the sportsman show and stuff, it'll be like no tax or something. It's like, okay, that's okay. Yeah. But CanCast is different. It's actually good deals. Yeah. It's stuff that you're like, I cannot not buy this. Yeah. Okay? And that's the difference between CanCast. So if you can squirrel away some money or steal some, we don't recommend
We don't advocate stealing.
Steal some from your own bank account. It would be well worth it. But it's not just a show. It is an experience. Yeah.
And speaking of the show side of it, so there are seminars as well that have not been announced yet, but there will be more coming shortly. I guess by the time this podcast airs, they will be announced, so that's great.
Yep.
There's also going to be door prizes as well.
Yeah.
So, if you're early or if you're there midday, or there's going to be raffle just for entering. There's going to be some cool stuff there. So, 100%, it's worth it. What you're going to get for the ticket price, you can get it online. You can get your tickets online.
Also, hey, did you buy your ticket for CanCast yet?
By the time this airs, absolutely.
But right now, you haven't.
No, have you?
I did. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And I'll tell you how easy it was. This is how easy it is to buy a ticket at CanCast. So don't wait in line at CanCast to buy a ticket.
Yeah.
Buy it online, and then they email you a QR code. Skip the line, walk right up, boom, they scan you, you're in.
I'm going to be silent for the next 5 minutes now on a completely unrelated topic.
He's just quickly buying his CanCast ticket online. But I highly recommend, if you haven't bought your ticket already, buy it online. It's not that expensive. It's like $10, $11 or something like that.
I think it's $10 plus tax.
Dude.
But yeah, the value you're going to get from this, like you can save, if you're worried about I have to spend money to get in a door to then spend more money, it's cheaper than the sportsman show. It's all fishing. So if you're an angler, this is where you want to be. And you're going to be getting a lot more than a $10 discount on whatever you're buying.
100%.
Like it's
100%.
It's a no-brainer.
If you don't have money, because a lot of us don't.
Yeah.
If you don't have any money, go to the show anyway. You will see insane stuff, and you will meet a ton of amazing. Yeah. Everyone there loves fishing.
Yes.
Everyone, all the vendors there love fishing, and they love to talk. All these guys want to tell you about their lures or their things that they make and they create. All these like lure makers and stuff. Talk to them. Yeah. They love talking about their product.
What you can't take home in physical products, you can take home knowledge by talking to these guys. You can just see what there's going to be guides there. There's going to be some people that you can kind of pick their brain. There's going to be pros you can talk to. Like I said, the seminars there.
Hey,
there's a lot you can actually learn. We're going to be there.
We're going to be there. So I mean, if you can't take anything home from the show, you can take home a high five for one of us.
And a selfie if we're feeling generous.
For a small fee. Just kidding. No, but seriously, if you guys see us at CanCast, come say hi. Unfortunately, like all the time people will be like, oh, I saw you at the store. I saw you at the sportsman show. And I'm like, well, why didn't you come say hi?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I thought you were busy. I'm like, dude, come say hi.
If you see this scraggly mustache driving around Oshawa, just like give me a honk and a wave. That'd be awesome.
So anyway, you can tell that 5-minute intro on CanCast turned into 20 minutes, but we're excited. So this weekend, I'm really excited. So we're going to do an episode after CanCast and talk about what we bought, all of our loot. But before we get to our main topic, we'd like to take a quick second to thank everyone for listening to this podcast. The feedback that we've gotten so far has been insane. Like I expected it to go, I expect to get so many views per episode. It's been 5 to 6 times more than I thought. It's been crazy. And I've been just getting messages on Instagram being like, hey, just listen to the podcast. Fantastic. I'm like, oh, good. I've gotten like 100 of those in the last week. It's been going crazy good. And I'm not saying that as a brag. I'm just happy that people find this podcast good. So if you're listening to this right now, thank you so much. This is amazing.
People have approached my wife at work and been like, oh, I can't wait for the podcast. I'm excited for the podcast. It's awesome. It's great. Like, people that aren't even approaching me, talking to someone who knows me and telling them they love the podcast. So it's cool to hear where this good feedback is coming from, because it's not just
people.
My mom says
Instagram.
Like, that was a great podcast, son. Like, it's genuine good comments coming back on the feedback. It's
and
amazing.
To add a little story, I saw my dad and he didn't even know what Spotify was because he's not really into technology. Okay. So I downloaded Spotify. He just got a smartphone. So I downloaded Spotify, and the first thing I downloaded was the Average Ontario Anglers podcast. And then he listened to it, and he texted me the next day. He's like, that was fantastic.
Yeah,
I'm like, he's a little biased. Yeah. So anyway, one thing to add, if you can please give us a review, if you're on Apple or Spotify or Google, if you can give us a review, it really helps us. So far, the reviews have been fantastic.
Yeah.
Only 17 or 18 one-star reviews. That's not bad. Just kidding. They've all been good. But anyway, just to add to this as well, again, our giveaway sponsor this week is the Robro.
Yes.
But if you are associated with a brand, you make your own product, you would like to sponsor a giveaway that we will talk about on our podcast and also on our social media platforms, please contact us ASAP, because we're actually, at this time of recording, we're booked all the way till June.
Yeah.
It's been insane. I've had literally tons of companies approach me and be like, hey, can we do this for you guys? I'm like, fantastic. Yeah. So we have some really cool giveaways coming, like giveaways that I wish I could win. We have people that are small shops. We have some large companies as well. So, yeah. Anyway, we don't want to get too commercial here, but these giveaways are going to you guys.
So we appreciate everyone who's already reached out to us as well, because we want to be able to pass this on to the listeners, to those who enter the giveaways. So there are some guidelines to enter the giveaways, but we'll discuss that later too.
Yeah. So anyway, our topic this week we finally got to. Well, about 15 minutes in, that's not bad, is steelhead fishing in the creeks. Steelhead fishing is something that I've been doing a long time, probably almost 20 years. As soon as I could go to the creek by myself, I grew up actually right down the road from a local stream here. As soon as I was allowed to go down the creek by myself, which was when I was 13, my dad said,
Times have changed.
You have to be 13. Yeah. And I started, I grew up trout fishing even at a young age, like very young, 5 or 6 years old. My dad took me stream trout fishing, and we didn't really fish steelhead. It was all stream trout, brook trout, brown trout, that kind of thing. But as soon as I was 13, I saved up my paper route money, and one of the first nicer rods I bought a Fenwick HMX float rod, which at the time was $120. And at the time, that was a lot of money for me. I saved up my paper route for, a few months, but I bought a nice, slow power or slow action 11.5 foot. It wasn't super long, 11.5 foot. And I actually didn't have a center pin because I couldn't afford one. So I just slapped my Shimano 2500 spinning reel on there, and
is that the Shimano Sahara?
The Sahara.
Yeah.
Back in the day, I still have it.
You use that for everything.
Yeah, I used to. That reel is basically almost falling apart. I retired it, but anyway, that was my setup. And I didn't really have any friends that float fish for steelhead, so I pretty much had to teach myself, because back then, YouTube was not really, a way to get information about fishing. Maybe it had started to be, but we were just learning stuff from books and magazines, like Outdoor Canada and Ontario Out of Doors. That's where I learned. And I learned by just, going out and getting skunked and getting skunked and getting skunked. And then once in a while, I get skunked again. But I hear a lot of people message me and be like, hey man, I'm not catching steelhead. What am I doing wrong? I'm going to give you some tips that I've learned from getting skunked for 20 years of catching steelhead.
Steelhead aren't salmon. You can't floss them.
Yeah, they actually take some skill to catch.
Yeah.
We're going to go over a few things that I've come up with, but we asked a question on the poll on Instagram, and I was expecting to get, a few, questions. There's 35 really good questions, and since these are the questions that you guys want to hear, I think we're going to go over my little spiel for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to go over all the questions, because they're actually phenomenal questions. And mostly they cover a wide range of topics. So I thought we could do that. So first of all, like we were saying, steelhead fishing, it can be intimidating if you're just starting to get into it. This is more of a steelhead fishing basics. If you already fish steelhead and you're like, I slay fish down at the creeks, good for you. This is probably stuff you already know. That's fantastic. But let me tell you a secret. We can all learn from each other. I'm not dumb enough to think that I can't learn from someone else. And believe me, if I've been on the creeks for 20 years and you've been on the creeks for 5 years, believe me, you can learn something from me. And I can learn something from someone who's been on the creek for more years than me. We can all learn from each other. So anyway, my initial advice would be just keep going. Keep trying. You're not going to go out and slay 30 steelhead in your first day ever steelhead fishing. There is a learning curve to steelhead fishing because you're dealing with current, right? You're not just plopping a Sanko into beside a dock and catching a bass. You're dealing with current. You're dealing with very line shy fish. You're dealing with really cold temperatures.
And often very clear water.
Very clear. Yeah. And some of the tips we're going to give you, hopefully will help you keep trying and be successful. And my main tip is don't let those salty old losers down at the creek, make you sad. Steelhead anglers are some of the most crusty people you'll ever meet. There's a lot of nice guys out there and girls, but there's a lot of people that,
they'll look down your nose at you.
Etiquette whatsoever. Yep. They're really like, oh, I can't believe you're fishing my spot. Usually these are old guys, but I've met a lot of crusty teenagers too. They think that they own the creek. Try to be nice to each other out there. We can all learn from each other. I had an experience just briefly. I was fishing on Monday. I had the day off work. Went down to the local spot. There's a few spots I want to fish, and there was no one there. And first 2 drifts, I caught one, a nice one, like a 7 or 8 pound hen, silver, beautiful. Fought it. And then when I was taking the hook out in the net, I looked up the creek, and at the next hole up, there was a young man fishing up there. And I was like, okay, no big deal. It's nice to be out there by yourself, but in the GTA...
Are you 50 years old? There's a young man fishing up
there. He was like 20, so yeah, I'm a good year older than him, a few years older. But anyway, he was fishing up there. Another old guy came down and saw him, and apparently was complaining that every hole had someone at it, which wasn't true. I fished upriver and there was no one there. It was just me and that young guy, and then this old guy that was mad. So anyway, the old guy left all crusty. The young guy comes down to see the fish that I was unhooking. And while I was unhooking the fish, I was like, you want to fish this spot? I know there's a few more in there. And he's like, oh, you don't mind? I was like, absolutely not. Go ahead. I just caught one. Happy. Like, I'm happy for you to fish it, right? So he started doing some drifts. He actually took a nice picture of the fish for me, which was fantastic. And it was actually a really good picture for once. But he was saying to me that, like, one of the main things that he finds discouraging about steelhead fishing was just the people that you bump into, which is sad because fishing should be something enjoyable. It shouldn't be something that you go home and you're, like, just ticked off.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, steelhead fishing, it's very toxic and it's crowded and there's not a lot of space to fish and there's too many people in each hole. So, like, just be prepared for that. That's what it is now.
Because I know for me, like, when I've gone out, I'm nowhere near as proficient at it as Jesse. I've started way later in life. For me, I've only gone out, a few dozen times in total in my life for steelhead. But when I go, I have either a fly rod or I have a spinning rod. And then I'm walking past these guys with these $2,000 center pin setups, and they're looking down their nose at me and in their waders, and I'm like got rolled up jeans and some wading shoes. Like, I don't have the funds, I don't have the gear, but I still want to go out there and enjoy it.
And guess what? You still catch fish.
I still can, yeah.
You don't need expensive gear to catch steelhead. We're going to get into gear a little bit, but yeah, 100%. So basically, yeah, I was talking to this young guy down at the creek. We had a really good conversation. He was fishing the pool, and then as soon as I was done unhooking my fish, I released it. I let him drift a few times, and then he put his hook back on the hook keeper, and he stepped back. He's like, okay, hole's yours. Because it was my spot. I was there, and I was like, you're fantastic. You actually understand river ethics. A lot of people don't, and that annoys me.
Yeah.
People will go above you, right beside you. They just ruin the spot. You have to learn basic etiquette. And we'll get into that in another episode, because that is a long topic. But I thought today we could just focus. So, like, there's tons of ways to catch steelhead in the creeks, and we're just focusing in the creeks. You can also catch them in the river mouth too, but it's very different. But like Andrew said, you can do fly fishing. I used to fly fish quite a bit. You can use a long spinning rod. You can use a float rod with a spinning reel. You can use a center pin setup, which is like a long, slow action rod with a center pin reel. You can even use a bait casting reel and free spool it like a pin, like a center pin.
Yeah.
So there's tons of ways to catch steelhead, but we're going to mostly focus on float fishing. So whether you're using a spinning reel and a float rod or a center pin reel, it's pretty much, I'd say, one of the most effective ways to catch steelhead. That's why it's the most popular.
Yes.
So on float fishing, we're going to talk about gear. If you're just getting into center pin fishing and you're listening to this, you're probably like, what should I get? Now, it really depends on the size of the river. Like, Andrew will tell you, like, what size of float rod you want to use on some of these smaller creeks.
Oh, definitely like a 14-foot BC one.
Yeah. Like, you don't want to be using that 15-foot, Niagara-sized float rod out there.
You need something that, can at most reach into the center of the creek, which is creeks are 10 feet wide. So, you don't need any more than a 10-foot rod around these areas. The small tributaries we're fishing, there are bigger ones on the Great Lakes. Like, if you go down to the Credit River, for sure you can use a larger rod. There's the river you were telling me about too, where guys are drift fishing down there.
The Saugeen.
The Saugeen.
Yeah, if you're fishing Niagara, the Saugeen, some bigger rivers, you can get away with generally longer rods, and sometimes there's advantages to that. But if you're fishing what we call the east tribs, there are all the small tributaries coming out of Lake Ontario on the east side. There's tons of little tribs, and the average they're only about 20-25 feet wide. Yeah. It depends on the spot. And I'd say the most common length of rod to get is a 12.5 to 13 footer. And that sounds long, but that's pretty normal. My favorite size of rod for fishing small east tribs is an 11 footer. So I don't know if you notice, like most rod manufacturers, like when they make float rods, they'll make something about 11 and a half feet, and then they jump up to about 13 foot. And generally I'd say decide where you're fishing. If you're fishing some small bushy creeks, get a shorter rod. You can even get shorter ones. You can get like 9.5 footers. But for most, small trib fishing, I'd get an 11 footer. The power of the rod. So most float rods, the action is like a moderate or a slow. So they have a lot of bend, and that helps protect the leader when you're fighting these fish. Sometimes you have to use very light line. But generally, so 11.5 or 11 foot to 13 foot rod, anywhere in there, it's gonna come down to personal preference, really. Some guys like really long rods. I know there's even some of the smaller creeks I fish, I see guys fishing like 14 foot rods, which seems a bit insane, but it works for them, right? But mostly you're gonna be looking at a light action, or a light power, or a medium light power. So really, it depends again on personal preference. Some guys like a little more of a whippy rod. Light power is very versatile for some, I'd say, fish under 10 pounds generally. If you're fishing bigger water, you're using bigger weights, I'd jump up to a medium light. If you need one rod to do both, get a medium light because it'll handle both situations. So that's for rods. Like, again, if you want more information on this, we can't cover everything in this podcast, or else this podcast will be like 3 hours long. Send us a message on Instagram. We'll hook you up. For reels, again, like we said, you can use a spinning reel. It's not as ideal. Center pins give you way more control over your drift. But if you're buying a center pin reel, buy the best one you can afford, or buy something used to save money, because center pin reels have got extremely expensive. Like, I bought my Islander a few years ago, and I remember it was about $600 because I got the one with the upgraded bearings in it. And I looked at the price recently at the store, and they went up. Everything went up. Definitely look used and buy the best one you can get, because buy once, cry once. If you buy a cheap pin, you'll use it for a few years, but then I see people sell them all the time. They want to get a better one. Float reels are very basic pieces of equipment. As long as you take care of them, they will last a long time if they're good quality. If it's a nice machined reel, you don't want one of those cheap pressed reels of pressed metal. They eventually will break. But if you get like an Islander and you take care of it, you'll hand that down to your grandkids. Like, the thing is a beast. Yeah, they're expensive. They're $700, but it lasts forever.
So with float fishing, I don't know if you're going to get into it there, but the reason why a float reel is so advantageous over a spinning reel is because you're fishing current all the time. Those reels spin at such a slow velocity with such little pull. You can just touch it and it will unravel your line at the same rate that it is drifting downstream. So it's not creating any undue pull on your float, on your line, on your drift as you're going along. Whereas if you're fishing a spinning rod, you can track it with your rod tip, but you're only going to have at most like 8-10 feet of movement on your rod down the creek, whereas you could let it drift.
You can do what they call a hero drift, and just on a center pin, just let it drift until you can't even see the bobber anymore. You can open the bail on a spinning reel, but then it's going to come off in loops, and say a fish grabs it, you flip the bail down and then set the hook with a bunch of loops and slack in there. It's not as efficient. Some old timers like it. It's not as ideal. But again, in the smaller trips, you can get away with a spinning reel. I did for years when I was a kid. But
I still do.
Yeah, it has nothing to do. It has to do more with presentation than what you're holding in your hand. The steelhead don't know what you're holding in your hand. If a bait is presented to them in a correct way, they're going to eat it. They don't care if you have an expensive center pin reel in your hand or a float rod or whatever. They don't care. We're going to get more into hooks and sinkers and stuff because there's questions about that. But as for baits, again, we're going to talk about the roe bro. One of the most common baits to use is roe or trout eggs or salmon eggs tied into a little mesh bag. They work really good. They're popular. They work mostly good, I'd say, for me personally, in like murky-ish water. In clear water, I like to use other stuff if I can get away with it. It's not as natural of a presentation in crystal clear water. I like to use like a single egg profile in clear water. We're going to get more into that, but if you are going to be using roe, definitely get a roe bro because it's very convenient. This is a product that I've been using for years, and I love it because it's so convenient. You put your roe in there. You can get ones with 1 canister, 2 or 3. So you could have different colors, different sizes.
Floating, sinking.
Yeah, I like to have different color bags. Sometimes that makes a difference. I don't know why. And then you just click it onto your belt or your pack, and you're good. It just dangles there behind you, and every time you need a bag, you just reach down, grab it, let it hang.
I'll say this. I don't have much experience. Again, I don't have a whole lot of experience with this stuff, but what experience I do have with roe is I countless times when I was using it, Jesse would give me, here's a little Tupperware container filled with roe, And I can't tell you how many times I'd pull out a little row bag, put on the hook, and then while still holding the open container, just dump it onto the ground while like hooking the hook through the bag. And I don't have that problem with the row, bro, because I can just like pop it open. I grab one, close it, and just drop it. It hangs down again.
Yeah.
So that, for me, that's worth it, because I'm not dumping my row on the ground every 10 minutes.
And we both have one. We both use it. It was a good niche to fill because, again, not all steelhead guys use row, but a lot of them do.
Yeah. And it's not just for row. I've used it trout fishing in the summer too, just for.
Well, you can put whatever you want in it.
Put some
you
worms in there,
put some
worms,
Smarties in there.
Put some spinners in there.
Common mistakes for steelhead fishing. Again, we're going to go more in depth in the questions, but common mistakes that I would say is a lot of people that I see that aren't catching fish is they're not fishing deep enough. You need to understand that the current speed is different at the top of the water than it is at the bottom. You need to get your bait down to the bottom. Steelhead generally are in the bottom quarter or the bottom 25% of the river or the creek. In these tribs, I'd say generally that's pretty true. You need to get your bait down. If your bait is literally, you don't have enough weight, so your bait's like way up at the top, you're rarely going to catch any fish because the bait's going way over their head. They're not going to, especially in cold water, they're not going to swim up to grab a row bag that's like 6 inches under the surface. Yeah. It needs to be down in front of their face. And especially in some swifter current, it needs to be down there right in front of their face. They won't move 6 inches to grab it.
Because the fish themselves, they'll hang right at the bottom of the creek, like Jesse was saying. So due to the rules of hydrodynamics.
Ooh, science.
Yeah. So you have, as the current comes along, and like we've seen on the creek surface, you can see eddies, you can see rip curls, you see water and it goes through rapids, it hits a rock and starts curling around the rock. You can see that on the surface of the water. That exact same thing is happening under the water. So when there's a boulder subsurface that you're not seeing it change the ripples on top of the water, there's still water flow past it, and it creates a current, a vortex behind it. So when a fish sits behind a rock or in a pit on the bottom, there's a lot less resistance for them. So when these fish are in their spawn, they're coming up these creeks, they get tired because they're going kilometers up these tiny creeks, blasting through riffles like that are way too shallow for them to normally reside in. So they exert themselves jumping up waterfalls, up dams in these riffles, and then get to these pools. They want to expend as little energy as possible and rest up for the next little run they do. So they will sit down in the bottom, they'll sit behind rocks, they'll sit behind logs, because that's where the water curling around these objects is actually going to help keep them in that spot using very minimal effort. So that's why if you're not fishing low enough, you're literally not in their strike zone. They're not going to exert themselves, move up into fast-moving water above them to grab something when they're trying to rest right now.
Yeah, and they're cold-blooded fish. Sometimes when you're fishing, especially in like the winter, like, you know, early spring, late winter, the water's freezing cold. Like it's literally just not frozen. And these fish, they won't move that far. They're very sluggish. They're cold-blooded. So you definitely, that's the main mistake. And that's a mistake that I made a lot when I was learning, because sometimes you'll see like your pink worms are bad for that, especially if you hook them wacky. The current catches it, and you look, and it's floating like really high in the water. And you're like, what the heck? Yeah. And if you've been fishing like that all day, almost all your drifts have been a waste of time. Yeah. You know, you might get lucky here and there. If
there's always exceptions to the rules. Like sometimes you'll cast out and you'll see a steelhead swim, 7 feet over and just slam whatever you plop down in the water.
Yeah,
but that's an exception.
Generally,
to the
like post spawn.
Yeah,
when they're super aggressive. But that's one common mistake. Another common mistake we'll get more into is only fishing obvious spots. I know, like you'll see like a nice pool or like a deep corner or something like that, and you're like, yeah, there's 100% fish in there. It's like, yeah, there may be, but probably 300 people fished for them, fishing the same baits as you all weekend long. Mm-hmm. Fish like pockets, fish behind rocks, like Andrew said, fish like little undercut banks, fish that are getting annoyed in these pools by seeing 5,000 row bags drift by their face. One or two of them will shoot up every once in a while, and where do they hide? In little nondescript spots. Yeah. And you can have a really good day, especially when the creek's crowded. Just literally look for those little spots. They may be sitting in like the weirdest spot, like beside a log or like behind a little rock in the middle of the river. And there might be one or two back there. And dude, those fish, they're unpressured. No one's touching them.
I've seen so many times walking the creek, because like you say, you're walking, especially if it's a creek, you're walking from your spot to spot, which are like your best holes, let's say. But you'll cut corners. You'll see like the creek bend up there and like, oh yeah, it's all just shallow riffles over there. I'm not going to even bother walking. And you cut the corner, cut across the peninsula, and fish the next bend in the creek. But when I've actually walked down there, I'll see, there's an overhanging tree. there's 4 inches of water and there's 6 steelhead sitting under it.
Yeah.
Because no one's bothered them all day.
Yeah. 100%. So yeah, like obviously the big deep pools and the big bends and the undercuts, those are the spots that you want to focus on, especially early in the season, like late winter, because those fish, like, they're gonna hole up in the deeper holes until some rain comes and they start pushing up. Yeah. But you're gonna focus on those. But if it is pressured, and all the steelhead creeks around here are pressured, believe me, you're gonna do that. Another thing that we'll get into more is, like, if fish are pressured, don't use the same baits. Everyone's like, row bag, that's all I use, it catches fish, I don't need anything else. Or like some guys are like, I just fish beads, or I just fish pink worms. It's like, you can't just fish one thing. It doesn't make sense. If everyone, like, think on the weekend, hundreds and hundreds of people are fishing, and all of them drift the same pool 300 times. That steelhead seeing, like, say they all fish row bags, that steelhead has seen so many row bags whip by his head. They can just turn off from that. And then you chuck something different, like a fly, and you might catch them on the first or second drift with that, because it's different and they're hungry. They just turn off of row bags. I've seen that happen. Other days, row bags are the deal. Some days you can't catch anything on them, so change it up. And that goes with all fish, but steelhead get very picky because, again, clear water, hundreds of people fishing for them. Anyway, there's so much to talk about steelhead fishing. We definitely cannot fit it in. We're going to do another one in April about, closer to opener, when, the end of April, when everyone's getting ready to go for steelhead. Those are very pressured fish, so we're going to talk about that. We can't really cover everything, but there's so many good questions. This is going to be our Q&A, and Andrew has the questions there, and we're going to kind of just answer as much as we can briefly. And again, if you need more information, if we can help out, we'll definitely do that.
So here's a question from Kyle Kalina. Best rigs, so double fly, bead and worm. What would be something?
Best rig?
Best rig, yeah. So what would be, let's say you have 3 rigs you're going to try that day to see what fish are using. What are your first 3 that you try?
Okay, so it depends on the water. But let's say in general with regular, slightly stained water, I'm always fishing a bead first. That's like my main thing. I'm going to start with like an 8mm bead. If the fish aren't touching that, my second option is to immediately just put a pink worm on. I'll keep the bead on and everything. I'll just put a pink worm on as well. That's my second rig. And then my third rig, if things get really finicky, is a fly. Now, I didn't mention row in there. Row is like my last ditch effort if the water's really murky or if the fish just sometimes really want it. But a fly is one of those baits that the fish just slam when it gets really pressured, because not a lot of people fish them. So those are my 3 rigs.
JR Fishing Hunting, my old schoolmate, shout out to Jeff.
Yeah.
So he was asking, how do you approach a busy area with tons of pressure? So a lot of guys in the creek, how do you approach that?
So like we were saying, like, these fish are really pressured. Etiquette wise, like if a pool's crowded, just keep walking. Don't try to squeeze into a spot if there's already a bunch of people fishing. If there is a spot and it looks like there's an area for you to fish, always ask, hey, do you mind if I fish here, or if I fish down here? And if they say yes, 100% go fish it. If they kind of hesitate, just be like, you know what, I'll just keep walking. That's always appreciated. I'm always happy to let someone squeeze in as long as they're being polite. Pressured fish, again, I'm not going to use the same baits as everyone. If everyone's fishing row, everyone fishes pink worms, try something different. If everyone's fishing beads, try a really small bead. Put a 6mm bead on instead of an 8. It may not seem that much of a difference, but it's a big difference. I've outfished people using 8s with a 6 all the time. And
it changes how it rolls into the water.
Yeah, and it moves along. It's very close. I'd actually say a trout egg is probably more like 5mm, like an actual trout egg. Mm-hmm. So like an 8mm, it's not even close to the same size as a trout egg.
No.
So a 6mm is very close. So I feel like it's the most natural presentation. And even a big fish will move over to grab a little trout egg. And they must taste that much amazingness that the big fish will move for a tiny little speck of an egg.
So here's a good one from Nature Daddies. What are your go-to hook sizes? He says he was always told to use tiny hooks.
Yeah, I was told that too, and that's a myth. Don't use a tiny hook. You're fishing for big fish. I feel like the tiny hook thing was kind of popular back in the day when people used to float fish with noodle rods. Yeah. Remember that? So you'd be using like 3-4 pound leaders, monofilament leaders, and you needed to use these small hooks to get fish. I personally use a bigger hook, not a big hook. I don't know the size off the top of my head, but like when I'm fishing beads, I like a straight, like a wide gap Raven. I think it's called a wide gap specimen hook. I'm not sure exactly the size that I use, but it's just a fair size hook. It's about the size of the bead that I'm using. I like to use, like if I'm using an 8mm bead, I like the hook to be about the same size or bigger than the hook. I don't like using small hooks. Modern float rods are very crisp and powerful. You can get a hook into a fish really easy. You don't need the tiny thin hook to, because you're using a whippy rod. You hook more fish. Like if I'm fishing a bead and that hook has to nick the fish in the mouth, I don't want a tiny hook. Now, again, if the fish are really pressured, I will drop down in hook size. But when I can get away with it, especially in murky water, why wouldn't you use a slightly bigger hook?
Yeah. There's another question here, which I thought was interesting. I can take this one if you want, Jesse.
Yeah.
Because I can't do most of these, but this one I actually know.
Ah.
So, Corey Reed, what's the difference between steelhead and rainbows? Technically, we don't have steelhead in Lake Ontario.
Yeah.
A steelhead is rainbow trout that are living in the ocean that move into fresh water to the spawn. Those are called steelhead. That term gets applied because they're coming from the big lake into the tributaries. They will still call them, like we still call them steelhead
migratory
here.
fish.
Yes.
They're not migrating from the ocean, but they're migrating from the Great Lakes, which are the size of mini oceans.
So a rainbow trout that resides in the creek is often called a native trout, just because it's never moving out all the way into the Great Lake. However, if they're coming in from a large body of water into the rivers, then you'd call it a steelhead.
Exactly. And I know a
generally
lot
from
of
the
guys
ocean.
from the West Coast will basically insult Great Lakes steelhead because they're not real steelhead because they weren't ever in the salt.
Yeah.
I don't care. The Great Lakes aren't small lakes. They're massive lakes. Like Lake Superior, massive. These fish are coming up from a big lake. Do they fight as good as the fish from the saltwater? Probably not. Are they still amazing fish to catch? Yes.
It's not a huge deal. I mean, if
It
you
will
want to
only
get mad
be
at
a
me,
huge deal if you
calling
get
it
into an
something different,
argument with someone from BC.
but just don't call it a speckle.
Yeah.
Sling pack or hip pack from Chase 14. What do you use?
I use a hip pack. I used to be like from the generation where we used vests. Remember the old steelhead fishing vests?
Still have my
feel
vests.
old. Fishing vests were good, but they're not popular anymore because it just puts a lot of weight on your shoulders.
Yeah.
And I found like for me, my shoulder, my neck would hurt after a decent amount of time down the creek. I like a hip pack myself. Some guys like shoulder packs. It's personal preference, really.
This is a really interesting question from Environmentalist 101. What's more important, having the right bait or right presentation?
Definitely presentation. I feel like with any fish, but even steelhead, if you present the bait to them correctly, most of the time, unless they're being super finicky, they're going to take it. Like if you properly present right in front of it, like a pink worm or a roe bag or a fly, fish is going to, people think, oh, steelhead don't eat. These are big fish. Some of them are like 10, 12, up to 20 pound fish. You think they're just starving the whole time for weeks as they go up the creek? No, they're eating. So if you present properly a bait to them, they're going to eat it.
Yeah.
They're not starving themselves for weeks. They're not salmon. They still need to eat.
Yeah, because rainbow trout oftentimes don't die after the spawn. They migrate back to the lake.
And they might spawn multiple times in their lifetime. So they definitely do eat. If you are presenting something incorrectly, but it's the right color, that doesn't matter. You're not going to catch fish on it.
Here is, I hope I say this right, Dernier Vols. That's not correct, but that's how I'm going to say it.
Okay. Sorry, man.
Some guys use the smallest bobber possible. Why is that?
It's personal preference. I have a few different bobbers. It's going to depend what size of river you fish. If you fish Niagara, you're going to use way bigger bobbers than if you fish an East Trib. I like to use the smallest bobber I can get away with that still properly holds up my weight. You don't want to use a small bobber that is constantly going underwater for no reason just because it's too small. Your bobber should hold your bait up. That's the whole point of it.
You're going to take off some steelhead guys. It's called a float.
Yeah, it's a bobber.
So the difference too with bobber size is depending how many split shot you have or dust shots, whatever you're using. If you oversize it, you're going to need way too much split shot to fish the where current you're fishing in,
which is unnatural.
Again, presenting your bait properly, that's where you're going to want to use a properly balanced. You need the right amount of grams of weight on there as to how many grams of float you're using. You don't want to overweight and then it's useless, or underweight and then
and that's going to take some
It's not
trial
gonna
and
set
error.
up.
There's no one correct answer that you could tell someone, but really I'd say if you're fishing the East Tribs, for instance, or any small creek, I'd have a selection from 4 gram floats all the way up to 9. That's a good selection for fishing these smaller creeks. Start off with 4 if the water's slow. And again, there's different kinds of floats. You can get acorn floats, you can get thinner pencil floats. If you're fishing very calm water, you can go with a thinner float. If you're fishing in current, you're going to want an acorn float because it doesn't sink through the current as easy. So there's so many variables, but really if you just get a standard size float, you see the regular, what's that brand we like? The wooden ones.
Thill.
Not Thill. Riverwood. Riverwood or Raven floats, just the regular size floats.
Yes.
Just get.
I'm thinking summer fishing again.
Yeah, get
It's
one
my
or
spring
two of
bobbers.
each size from 4 to 9 mil or gram, and then just go from there and adjust. So water's high, put on a big one.
So leave my 30-gram float at home for what I normally use for pike.
This isn't a pike season yet.
There was from Steelheader Jacob. What's your favorite way to target steelhead?
This has nothing to do with float fishing, but I'd say my favorite way to target steelhead is using a Panther Martin spinner. I have a really sick like hardware, like we call spoons and spinners hardware, right? I have a really sick hardware combo. It's a 9.5 foot St. Croix medium light, fast action. It's not like a slow rod, and I pair that up with a 4,000 Shimano reel, and 8 to 10 pound mono, and I just whip out a little Panther Martin, just reel it, and then right through a pool. And these fish post spawn, after the spawn, you can catch them before too, but they slam it. Boom! They slam it. Your rod just zzz, and then as soon as they feel the hook, zzz, they go straight downstream, and you're chasing these fish. Like that to me is so exhilarating. And I know there's lots of guys that are like, oh, you shouldn't use treble hooks in the creek, and you're snagging fish. It's like, I'm not snagging fish. I'm reeling a spinner through a deep hole. Okay. You're more likely to snag a fish dragging a bait under a float with a long leader than I am with a spinner. But to me, spinners or like a little flatfish, like a little crankbait, very fun.
Even like little minnow baits, stuff like that.
And it's visual too. Sometimes you can target fish. You'll see like a fish sitting like in front of a, like beside a rock, and you'll chuck a little crankbait beside it or a spinner and just reel it, and then you can see it just lock its eyes on and just swim up and smack it. Yeah. And I have a quick story about that. So back when I was young, like 14, I went fishing with my buddy Dax, and everyone was it was the trout opener, and everyone was fishing. It was crowded, and we got to this nice bend, and there was about, I'd say, like 15 steelhead in this pool. You could see them. The waters didn't clear. They've been fishing for hours since the break of dawn, right? All float fishing and all these fancy center pin reels. But at the time, all I had was my spinning rod. It was a 6.6 medium with a my Sahara 2500 Shimano with 10 pound mono, right? And we get to this pool, and the fish were just all swimming around, and I had a little Cleo, not a big one, a little one, and I chucked it into the pool. First cast, this big buck. It was I'd say 13, 14 pounds. It was big. It just came up and smacked it. Like it just crushed it, and I'm just fighting this fish. And the guys were mad at me because I was scaring the fish in the hole. I was like, what would happen if you had hooked that fish?
Yeah.
But they were mad at me because they thought I snagged it because I was a kid using a spoon. Comes up, dude, the fish was right in the top of his mouth. Little Cleo. I was like, hardware works. And all these guys, don't be annoyed by them thinking they're all snobby that only like bait and flies work. Spoons can work too. Spoons, spinners, crankbaits, and it's really fun.
I really like fishing for steelhead in the dropbacks, because then the creeks open up a lot more, not as many guys there.
Yeah.
And
they're aggressive.
Then they're a bit more aggressive too. Yeah. So I really like
that being said, early season when they're dime silver, that's amazing.
Best fight of your life. Here's a good one from, I don't know how to say these names sometimes. Vincentier Garth. Opinion on how to get started into steelhead. So I know we talked a bit about getting, if you want to get a float set up, but if you've never fished for steelhead before, kind of what could you use to get out there then, I guess? Yeah,
so if you're going to invest a little bit and buy an actual float fishing combo, I would buy the best float fishing combo you can. If either buy a center pin rod and reel, or get a long float rod and put a spinning reel on it. Like we said, get a selection of floats, get some leader material. You're going to want I'd say 6 pound test fluorocarbon is a good starting place, general purpose. Buy a bunch of hooks. And then if you want to just be simple, I just buy a pack of pink worms, maybe a pack of beads, go down to the creek, focus on those deep holes, find deep water. If you can't see the bottom and it's slow and has a little bit of current, that's the spot you want to fish. Make sure, like we said, make sure your bait's down by the bottom, and then repetition, make sure your drifts are good. Keep going, don't get discouraged, and keep fishing these good spots, and you will eventually catch fish. These fish are not impossible to catch. There's just a learning curve. So be prepared to learn a little bit. That's my advice. But you don't need an expensive combo or all this baits. You can literally go with a handful of pink worms and some hooks and go catch steelhead. Well, you need a fishing rod too.
I wanted to take a little detour of, I was thinking of my favorite steelhead fishing story I've ever had.
Okay, tell me this.
So Jess and I were fishing, we call it Jumper Creek.
Oh, Jumper
Creek. Nicknamed
Creek.
after this story. So there was this big pool. There was this massive, probably like 4 foot around tree that was kind of angled right over the pool.
So and just as some story, this is like headwater. This isn't wide open. This is like the creek's 10 feet wide.
Yeah. And up above me there's a log jam, and below me there's a log jam.
If you hook a fish here, you're like doomed.
Across the creek from me, I'm just laying the scenery here. Across the creek, there's like 3 down trees in the water, like just like no branches anymore, but just like the logs down in the water, and like a 6-inch shallow bay off to the side. And I can't see. I know there's fish below me in front of the one log jam, but I can't see. I'm hiding. It was crystal clear water. I'm hiding behind this massive tree leaning out over the creek. And so I cast out using a worm, and Jesse's standing on the opposite side of the creek. I'm like, just tell me if a fish bites it, because I can't see it all.
Because I could see where I was standing. I could see everything.
Yeah. So I'm completely blind at this point, and Jesse's like, all of a sudden he's like, hey, there, set the hook. So I set the hook. It was a nice little drop back buck.
Yeah.
And I don't think that was my first steelhead, but it was one of my first ones.
Your first bigger one, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden this thing starts like cartwheeling through the air. Like,
it was a jumper. It's one of those fish. It jumped like what?
And
10
it
times?
wasn't fresh by any means. It was fairly dark coloring on it.
Yeah.
But
it
was jumping. So this thing I can't see. I'm just holding this rod out, hoping it doesn't get snagged in the tree. And it pinwheels over top of these logs into the shallow bay and swims underneath the logs back into the creek. And Jesse's just like, you're done. That's it. Like,
yeah, because his line was literally just like
wrapped right around. And so I'm like, I'm not giving up. So I pulled it. I saw at this point I could see it when it was on that side of the creek. And so I saw its head shake down. I gave a pull on the line. I pulled its head back underneath those logs, swam directly into the bay. Then it started running towards me, and just as it's getting close to the logs, I just like reefed on my rod to bring its head up and forced it to jump back over this log jam.
And it did a cartwheel over the log back into the pool, and then it got it in the net.
Yeah, it was amazing. So yeah,
it was amazing.
That's probably my favorite steelhead story. But they are an amazing fish to catch, like especially when they're fresh. You hook it and they're jumping instantly, like 6-7 times, cartwheels like a meter up in the air sometimes.
Blistering runs.
Oh.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
And the great thing about steelhead fishing is, back in the day it was different because winters were cold, but down here it's different. Like you can fish steelhead pretty much right through the winter, because
especially now
the creeks don't really lock up that much anymore. Like there's probably about a month period, but like you're fishing January, February, March, April, May. I catch steelhead into June in some of these spring-fed headwaters, and then the summer nothing. And then September, October, November, December, like once you get into it, you can realize why a lot of people do it. And some people only fish steelhead because it takes up their whole year. Are there any other really good questions? Like we have enough for maybe 2 or 3 more.
So the one Lip Ripping podcast, do you ever eat them or catch and release only?
I do eat steelhead, but I'm very picky on what I keep.
Yep.
I don't keep. Back in the day, I'm sure most guys, the steelhead guys, I used to keep hens and keep their eggs and then eat the fish, obviously. I don't keep hens anymore. I might, the rare occasion for the eggs, but I buy my eggs now. I actually buy my eggs from Fish Heads Canada. It comes vacuum sealed. I freeze them, and then when I use them, is it as good as fresh out of a fish egg? Probably not, but they work enough that it catches me fish. I have no complaints. I will keep the odd fish. If I do keep a fish, I usually keep a buck, and I keep smaller fish. I don't keep bigger fish. Small ones taste better anyway. I generally release probably 95% of the fish I catch, though. I probably only keep like 1 or 2 a year at most. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can keep your limit every day. That's the law. I have no qualms with seeing a guy carry a fish home from the creek. They're delicious fish.
If I see a stringer of 15 on the side of the creek with their belly split open, though, I've got issues with you now.
Yeah.
And I guess the last one is just from Chase 14, leader lines. What would you recommend for, or what do you use for leader lines?
There's lots of options. Like in our last podcast about fishing line, generally fluorocarbon gets the nod from, I'd say, the majority of steelhead anglers, just because of its invisibility, and it's fairly abrasion resistant. I generally have on mine, because again, it's going to depend where you fish. If you fish in an Niagara or the Saugeen or something bigger water, you're going to have different poundage. But for where we fish in the East Tribs, I'm going to have on my leader material, I'm going to have 4 pound, 5 pound, 6 pound, 7 pound, and 8 pound. Now you don't need all those. You could probably get away with 4, 6, and 8. And generally 4 and 6 would be good. I'll drop down to even 3 sometimes if the water's legit gin clear, but generally 6 is where I'm going to start. And then if the fish are just not biting, I'm going to drop down to 4. And sometimes you will notice a difference. And a quick story about that. I fished a spot that I grew up fishing down at the creek near my house that I grew up in. It's this nice little spot, and there was a bunch of fish in it, and these 2 guys were fishing it. It seemed like they knew what they were doing, and they said to me, oh, no, nothing here, like they're not biting. And I went in there and I tied on a 3 pound leader. Really long, like 3 or 4 feet long, 6 mil bead, just super finesse. First drift I caught one. And I felt like, amazing. I was just like, oh. And literally first drift, I smoked a fish. And it probably just had to do with that line diameter. That's it. It's not that I'm a better angler than them. It's just their presentation wasn't as good as mine. Experiment with lines. And again, if it's murky, yeah, use heavier line. Why wouldn't you want to use an 8-pound instead of a 6?
Take an advantage when
murky
you can.
water. Yeah. But yeah, I'd say from 4 to 8, but 4 to 6 is good.
This will be the last one then.
Okay.
DNots5 asked, how do you know what river to pick and why?
Pick the one that
is closest to you.
Closest to you. Just kidding. There's lots of trips around here that we fish. I fish a lot of them for years, and some of them are known for clearing out faster after a rain. Like there's a few creeks that people are like, oh, there's a really big rain and everything else is blown and too muddy. But there's these certain creeks that clear out a little faster than the other ones, maybe half a day or a day earlier. So again, like that may be a consideration after a rain.
And another thing too is talk to, if you know any local anglers or if you know local tackle shops. Asking general questions is not going to be a bad thing.
Yeah.
Like if you're asking for specific spots, which isn't as big of a deal on creeks because everyone knows them anyways.
Yeah.
You can see when a spot is there or not. But you can ask, hey, how's the run doing right now? And they'll tell you, like, hey, it's slowed down, or they were killing it yesterday on whatever. They don't mind sharing information, generic information like that. Again, when you can get the right people in the community where we can all support each other, we all want to essentially get out there and enjoy fishing.
Yeah, don't ask for spots though. Like I get people all the time, and I don't really post steelhead pictures anymore. A lot of people are like, oh, you don't steelhead fish anymore. It's like, I do. I just don't post steelhead pictures, because when I post steelhead pictures, I get literally dozens of comments on my Instagram. I mean, it helps that we have 19,000 followers, but it'll be like, oh, what creek are you fishing? What's the location? Oh, what's the water like there today? Or oh, are you at this creek? Are you at that creek? It's like, I'm not going to tell you. Go drive down to the creek yourself. I know you can't always just drive down to the creek, but what I do is sometimes I'll drive by the spots where everyone parks to fish. And if it's full, it probably means the fishing is hot. So I'll go the next day. If you go there and there's no cars there's probably a reason. The water's probably, one time I got to the spot and no one was there, and I was like, oh great, I got the spot to myself. I went down the creek and it was blown super muddy. I was like, okay, that's why. There's so many creeks. It depends. I have my favorite creeks.
Yep.
We have our favorite creeks that we like to fish. Sometimes we'll hit multiple ones in the same day, see which one is better, but really, it's personal preference. Sometimes people are like, oh, I don't like fishing this creek. I like fishing this creek. It depends.
And each creek has their own amount of fish. The size of the run changes between creeks.
Yeah. So
you can find out information online. They do every year. The M&R and stuff and Cloaca, stuff like that. They look at the numbers of the runs. So you can often find that information online to see which creeks have the highest number of runs. Generally speaking, there's going to be more anglers on them. Yeah. But at the same time, you get the right day, you might have a better chance of getting into something just because of the sheer number that might be running that year.
Yeah, and to say with that, some of the popular creeks, you could say, there are some popular creeks and some that are still catch fish but not as popular. If the popular creeks are packed, sometimes we'll go to one of the more not as popular creeks and smash fish that day because no one's there.
Yeah.
So if you want to catch fish, don't focus on what's popular or not. Just go out and catch fish. There's tons of creeks though, and
any creek that reaches the Great Lake that you can see and make sure that it's not a fish sanctuary. Check it out yourself. Yeah. Take a look,
or do research on Google. If you type in steelhead fishing Southern Ontario, there's tons of information. Don't be asking people for their spots. Do the research yourself. Put in the foots, the steps down at the creek. Put in the foots. Put in the steps. But the thing is, I get it when people are like, why wouldn't you want to share? I want to learn how to fish. It's like, here's my example I tell people. Imagine if Andrew was a baker. He's great at making cakes, amazing at cakes. And I go into his shop and he has a cake there. And I'm like, that's an amazing cake. Imagine the cake is a fish picture. How did you bake it?
Let me tell you all my secrets.
What are the exact ingredients? What temperature do you bake it at? How long do you bake it at? And where do you buy your ingredients? I got good at making this cake because it took me a lot of time and energy and cost to learn how to make it and experience to make it. Why would I just give it to you for free? That's not fair. So that's how I explain it to people. A lot of time and effort goes into learning how to steelhead fish and finding spots. Why would I just give that to you for free? Not for free, I'm not going to charge people, but why would I just give that to you when you can literally go and learn yourself? I'm happy to give people tips. I'm not going to give you exact locations. That may sound mean to some people, but that's life. If I tell you my spots when I go there, and there's 10 people there now because I told everyone my spot. So That sounds a bit like a rant, but you have to understand with steelhead fishing, you can't just expect everything to be handed to you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are people, like, we are happy to help you find fish spots, or like, how to fish spots and how to learn how to find spots. We're not going to give you spots, and a lot of people won't either.
So any last words, Jesse?
Well, I have last words, but we have to do our giveaway.
Yes.
So anyway, again, we can't cover everything on a steelhead episode. We're going to do another one about, closer to opener. But if you have any questions, I hope that wasn't too crazy, because we kind of jumped around a little bit, but me and Andrew are having fun. So we do have the giveaway. Again, this podcast was sponsored by the Robro. And again, she's giving away a custom one. And this giveaway we announced on our Instagram a few weeks ago. And we had basically a question. We're like, what canoe does Andrew own? Listen on our podcast and then direct message us. And we had a whole bunch of people enter. See, I have the wheel of names. So I'm going to spin it right now. Actually, I'll let Andrew spin it.
I spun it too hard. It's still going. There we go.
The winner is
Mike Labatt.
Mike Labatt. Mike
Congratulations.
Labatt, you have won a custom Robro. And we'll get in contact with you, and Marissa will make that for you, and she'll ship it out to you. So again, we'd like to say thanks for everyone for listening to this podcast. Again, we are taking sponsors for upcoming episodes. So Andrew, take us away.
So be sure to subscribe. Again, thank you for anyone who is. If you get a chance, please leave us a review wherever you're listening to the podcast. We have it on multiple streaming services right now, and even on YouTube. So if you want to take a look and see us with our random gestures and us stare lovingly into each other's eyes during the whole podcast, because this is essentially a conversation between us that we just record. Watch us on YouTube. And I guess the last bit of advice that I'd leave is, as Jesse put it, steelheading is difficult, and so is life.
But keep on trying. And if you have any questions, you're having a difficult time catching steelhead, send us a message. We will help you out. We're looking forward to CanCast, and hopefully we will see you there.